Good day, kia orana, talofa, maloelele, bula, namaste, whakalofa, lahiatu, maloni, whakalofa atu. And a warm Pacific Oceania welcome to our industry panel this evening, co-sponsored by Auckland AUT University and the Academy of International Business Oceania Chapter. My name is Associate Professor Maureen Benson-Ray from the University of Auckland Business School, and I have the honour to be President of the AIB Oceania Chapter. For those of you who don't know, AIB is the major global organisation for the study of international business. We currently have in the regional chapter over 100 members, many of whom are here tonight in person or on Zoom. And I understand that we have international business colleagues and researchers zooming in from all over the world. So welcome to everyone. This evening, we have a new initiative for AIB Oceania, which is a fantastic panel of industry speakers. So it's my pleasure, first of all, to introduce our speakers. So we have Niall Martin, Quality and Safety Liaison Manager from Air New Zealand. Then we have Rachel Stotter, Director, International Sales at T&G. Then Brittany Oliver, Senior Commercial Lead, Zuru. And last but not least, Chris Greville, Regional Manager, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. So the format this evening is I will now hand over to Dr. Omid Aliasgar from AUT University, who will take us through the housekeeping arrangements and then invite our fantastic panelists to respond to some questions. Thank you, Omid.
Thank you, Maureen. Kia ora, everyone. Before I start, just let me go through these, health and safety issues. So in case of emergency, the emergency evac is on level 2, and right outside the New Suite Cafe. And the nearest bathroom is, down the hall, turn left. You can see the nearest bathroom. Is that okay if I want to see it so everyone can see our amazing panelists? So my name is Omid, and I'm a lecturer at AUT from Department of International Business Strategy and Entrepreneurship. Welcome, everyone. Actually, I'm quite surprised. I'm quite glad to have everyone here. I think we have almost around 100 registered through this event. This is our first panel for this year. It's great to have you all, and also let me welcome to our very special guest speakers here. So I don't want to keep you, wait any longer. So let me start with my first questions. I start with Chris. Chris, I would like to ask about how, in your organizations, Fisher & Paykel, how did you navigate the business through this COVID? When this COVID happens, the disruptions, how you react to adjust to this, to mitigate the disruption?
Yeah, there's a number of answers to that question. Firstly, we're in a unique situation where our business has grown dramatically as a result of COVID, and we've had to adjust to that by obviously dealing with things as they come along, and that is, a good example would be the difficulties with freight. So getting raw materials into New Zealand and then turning them into product and then exporting them has been a difficulty. So our logistics team has had to work exceptionally hard in finding channels to make that happen, as well as obviously increasing our capacity to produce. Because doctors around the world have found that the products that we make are very effective at treating COVID. So we've had to adjust to that increased demand by increasing the amount of product that we can make and safely deliver to those end users. Now that brings with it a number of opportunities, but also a number of challenges, because those end users might receive a product, but they don't necessarily know how to use it. So our sales team have also had to adopt, and our marketing team to support them have had to come up with ways of educating the end user how to use these products. And traditionally, our sales team has just been allowed to go and visit hospitals, home care providers, and other clinicians to teach them in person. So we've had to find ways around that, and a lot of that is based through online live meetings, and that's great where we know who the end user is. So we've already got a relationship, but where we don't have a relationship, we've had to adopt some new strategies such as online learning and setting the end user up with a base knowledge through these educational courses, which our teams in New Zealand and offshore have helped to develop, for our sales team to then follow up with via an e-learning or live chat platform. So it's just a couple of the ways in which we've adapted to take on this situation.
Quite interesting stuff. I carry on the same questions from you, Brittany. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I think Zoro has a couple of R&D plants or offices around the world, like in India or in Italy. So in terms of when COVID hit, so how did you manage this global value chain, and how did you what kind of strategy did you use to somehow overcome the...
Yeah, so within Zoo, we have our fast-moving consumer goods side of the business, and then we've got our toys business, which I'm mostly a part of, and then we've also got housing, which is a lot of the work into India and Italy as well. But I'd say actually that vertical integration has been a massive asset for us during COVID, because it means that we own parts of our production chain or development chain that other companies don't, which means that we've been able to move faster, react faster, own those decision-making processes, eliminate bureaucracy, and act really fast. And a great example of that would be, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bactive, which is a line of PPE equipment, and that line of PPE, so face masks, gowns, gloves, hand sanitizer, Zoo actually, from ideation to shipping that, took 12 days, so 2 weeks for them to react in COVID to that. And that comes from, within our toy business, we're developing new product every 6 months. So our team in China, from a product development perspective, so ideation, branding, prototyping, getting things done, is one of the fastest in the industry. And so they were able to take that core competency from toys and actually use that in COVID to create a whole line of PPE equipment. And I think with New Zealand, they ended up shipping in like 91 million items within PPE to the government as a first reactor there. So I'd say that's definitely an opportunity that came out of that vertical integration of Zuru's chain and how fast we can move in our development.
That's pretty interesting, because we often talk in class that when it comes of crisis, usually firms can use the opportunity. In your case, they build a capacity to benchmark one way of doing that in toys, and then it applied in different ways. That's quite interesting. Brittany, thanks for the answer. Rachel, as a director of international sales and marketing, I would like to ask some questions in terms of marketing and sales strategy in terms of crisis. So what have you done when the COVID happens, and how did you manage this sales throughout this time?
If I kind of reflect on it now, we've tried to build in a lot more diversity and contingency into our value chain. So I guess as a primary industries business, and apples is probably, I'll talk about apples, so it's probably the biggest part of the business. We were hit in the right from the orchard right through to consumer with COVID. So we didn't have enough labour to pick our apples, and that has been the case this year as well in 2021. So we were faced with, from a sales and marketing perspective, we were faced with not having the volume of apples, and then sometimes not having the right size or mix of apples. And so we had to work really closely with customers in our markets to try and retrofit what we did have into programs. There's always an element of that. That exists all the time with primary industries because you get what you get off the trees sometimes. So a whole lot of flexibility. I think probably the thing that the differentiator for us in terms of making that a little bit easy was having presence in our markets. So we've got a strategy to grow in-market capability and presence. So moving from being an exporter out of New Zealand to being a truly global company. So growing that capability in the market, having boots on ground. And yeah, it comes with a whole set of other challenges, lots of different cultures, different time zones, and the complexity, tax, legal, all of that stuff. But that was one real advantage for us last year, and that we had people on the ground who were able to go out and work with our customers to try and get that flexibility. We had markets like Vietnam and Thailand where the wholesale markets or the wet markets just completely shut down because of the infection risk. So having our people there to be able to move and diversify across channels and start to grow. So we've really had to accelerate our growth of the e-commerce channel, which for fresh produce is quite new. It's quite a different thing to have a fresh produce proposition in e-commerce versus maybe one of your amazing toys, Brittany. So yeah, but having people in market, I think, has been one of the ways we've really been able to do that.
Amazing. In terms of e-commerce and technology, I think I'm going to ask the questions later on and how this technology would impact, and how did you apply the technology to somehow adjust to this disruption. Niall, I have the same questions for you as obviously hospitality sector was the one that hit hard during this COVID thing. So as a manager, senior manager in Air New Zealand, what was your first reaction and what were you thinking at the time of this disruption?
I don't know if you can hear me. I'm not mic'd up. I can use the mic if you want. I think, how did I react basically? It changed from day to day. Even like when you're at a meeting, you'd make a decision at the end of the meeting and you'd go out and it'd all be changed again. It was so rapid. To put it into context, like we went from 650 flights a day to 35, right, overnight. And you think, okay, well what does that mean? Well, it means you've got like billions of dollars of assets on the ground, right? Each aircraft, like 777 is probably about $300 million US. And you kind of go, all right, well, how does that get paid? Because it'd be on a lease, or sometimes we own them, but we obviously owe money. And then you get hit so many right hooks, you're begging for a left type of thing, because then the next project is, right, you got to get those aircraft into the storage. So where do we go? We go put them into the desert. What desert? So we said we'll put them in Alice Springs. So we get into Alice Springs, and then a couple of days before it's going, the guy who owns this place in Alice Springs says, no, we don't want you. We got someone else. So we go, right, where do we go now? So we put our 777, 200s and 300s up in a place called Victorville up in California, some in Roswell, New Mexico. You probably know Roswell. And we've got a couple in Auckland, right? So you're talking about 15 aircraft, bog standard price, probably $300 million US each. You've got probably a $6 billion business gone to 500 million overnight, just, somebody's just... And then you kind of go into the survive mode, and you've got to get rid of people, right? For no reason. They haven't done anything wrong. And like we got rid of 4,000 people. I lost 50% of my direct reports, and I couldn't even shake their hand because we were in lockdown. I had to do it online through Teams. And for those of you who've been doing your studies through Teams or managing the business through Teams, it's there's nothing. You want that little bit of something tangible, to have it. I wanted to hug them and say, look, it's not your fault. So I think every day, when I think back to it, threw a different problem at me. And not just me, all my colleagues and people I worked for, and it was, pretty difficult. And bearing in mind, like I went through September 11th in aviation, went through SARS, MERS, the GFC, they were all big ones. but this is the mother of all.
I think, Maureen, if you're agree, I think maybe we can also take questions at the same time from our audience. If whenever they have questions, we can, you can just raise your hand and ask your questions while we are on the topic. And also for those who are watching, for those who are online, you can write down your questions and type down your questions. And at the end of the session, probably for 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to take Q&A. So please feel free to ask questions whenever you have. On that topic, Niall, you were talking about this, 4,000 people, which is quite sad. But that's the past. But now I'm going to ask a question about current and present and future. So what are the strategies for the post-COVID recovery for Air New Zealand?
When somebody asked me a similar question about a month ago, and I remember Mike Tyson saying, everyone has a plan till I punched him in the face. We have a plan and we have a strategy, right? Just plan versus planning is always different, as you guys know. We are in the revive phase of this 800-day plan, right? And there's days we all feel we've put a foot back in the survive phase, especially with the Trans-Tasman bubble, we're losing that. And, because we got like Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Brisbane, these places that are, it's keeping us going, right? Keeping us alive, basically. And it stops overnight, The strategy, as I say, in the plan, it changes day to day, depending on the problem that arises. So if you can imagine, it's so dynamic that my project list is, say, yay big, one day, and it's the next day it's that much. So I can't really answer that question. The strategy is probably just be light-footed, be ready to move, be ready to change, do your comms good, bring your team on board with you, and that's, for me, that's the key thing for me. I flattened the hierarchy. I've always done that. Flattened the hierarchy so we all bail in together. And, as I said, I lost 50% of my staff. 50% is a big hit. And then we got double the workload we had prior. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm answering that question. I just think just be nimble, be ready to change, rapid fast would be my answer.
Thank you, Niall. Rachel, just quite similar questions in terms of, because I think we have a great panel from different sectors, so it's good to hear different answers. Yeah. What do you think about, what would happen? What kind of a strategy do you have after,
I think we learnt an awful lot, clearly, through COVID, and some of that, if I think about making the value chain a lot more resilient, right from orchard through to consumer, some of the big learnings are the need for diversity in our workforce. And you will have seen all the press about seasonal workers and getting labour into New Zealand, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to have a mix and better ratio of permanent to seasonal workers. We need to find what the gaps in our labour force are and look at really creative options. So can we get mums to do the shifts from 9 to 3 who want to be at home with their kids? So really digging deep and kind of targeted options and to build that flex and diversity in. Then if I think about shipping, which has been, picking's been a nightmare, packing's been a nightmare, shipping's been a nightmare. But we've learnt heaps in that space, and we've worked, one of the really great outcomes is this pan-industry collaboration across primary industries. So you've got meat, you've got seafood, you've got dairy, you've got produce, fruit and veg, working together to get their product. And because a number of us have really perishable goods, it's really heated and it needs to be done urgently. So great collaboration in that space. We no longer just rely on containers, we now do charter ships. So we still think there's going to be a flow-on impact around shipping into our next seasons. So what are we doing to make that mix of shipping options live on into the future, and how do we rearrange and renegotiate with our shipping partners to do that. So I guess it's taking the learnings and being quite realistic about the fact that this is not going away in a hurry. It hopefully won't be to the extent it has been this year, but how do we take those learnings and make them part of how we work now? And I think I agree with Niall that being nimble and being flexible and being ready for anything, which is often difficult historically in businesses that have been programmed to do things in a really certain way. And I think that changes the way we approach problems. It changes the way we incentivize, we manage, we set targets. It changes the way you recruit for people just in terms of mindset. So I think it's had, you know, an impact right across. And if I think about the way we work with our employees now, we've created a program called Flow. We did it within a couple of months at TNG last year and said, if you want to work 40-60% from home, go for it. We're about outcomes, we're not about outputs. And we've really lived that. And so we have a whole lot of flex for our people now. And that, in terms of engagement and retention, I think that's had a really, really positive impact. We've made that part of our employee value proposition, and we actually do live it. I think a few companies in certain industries have talked about it, but don't actually live it. So, and that for me comes from our CEO, who's really lived it himself. Yeah, just a few things.
Oh, you have a question. I think I need to pass this to you because you want to.
Just going back to the chartered shipping option. Yeah. So were you getting your own boats, or what do you mean by that?
Chartered, yeah, absolutely. Some cases, for some markets, we've gone fully just TNG Apples, get them on there and send it up to Europe. But some cases we've worked with other exporters to do a collaboration or consolidated charter ship. But as opposed to just relying on your own kind of one-on-one with a shipping company container space, it's a mix of those options now. Yeah, and awesome. Sometimes, like you can't, I'm definitely no technical expert, but you can't put kiwi fruit with fruit at a certain time of the maturation because they're obviously still maturing sometimes on that voyage. Yeah, so it's been really interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Any other question? No. You mentioned about value chain resilient, I think, which is quite a hot topic, and everyone is talking about is resilient and value chain because of this disruption, massive disruptions after COVID. I would like to continue on that and ask Brittany. Brittany, also you talk about benchmarking and the building on your capability from toys and expanding in other fields. What was the strategy, or how could you better optimize the supply chain? To enhance the resilience and, somehow to avoid these disruptions and,
Yeah, in terms of, I'd say there's a lot of fundamentals within business that haven't really changed. Like you're saying, eliminating hierarchies. We're a very flat organisation, so that means, every day is different. But like you've got the autonomy, make the decision because we've just got to keep going. Things like that are still really powerful in being able to operate at speed. But I'd say just kind of coming back to that vertical integration within your chain. Two really key teams that we've sort of started to bring in-house with Zuru are our sales operations team and our performance marketing team. And so sales operations has been phenomenal. We had it started to be set up before COVID, but essentially, tagging onto the shipping issues, we've got a lot of that in China at the moment. Demand from the US, for example, is going through the roof. They're like, we need more product. And where our factories, we're saying, can you increase your capacity by 10,000? The factory's like, no, we're actually going to decrease because you've still got 10 containers sitting in our backyard that haven't shipped yet. So you're getting squeezed at both ends. They want more product, you can't get it out. So it's been really interesting because the flip side of that is, do we then over forecast, or then do we send in too much product? So what our sales and operations team does is they essentially are laddering out our point of sale for our retailers. So Walmart and Target, for example, in the US, every week they're going through and being like, this is how much we sold, this is how much I'm forecasting, we're going to be out of stock in X amount of weeks. Or actually, we're going to be overstock and we need to start cancelling orders. So that team is really specialised in managing that stock and inventory flows, which has been really powerful for us. We didn't have that before. In smaller businesses, that's what a buyer or a buying team would be responsible for. But the fact that we've brought that in-house for our major retailers, we only do it for our top retailers in the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand. But that has just enabled us to be able to be so much more reactive to helping them manage their business, because our customers are also struggling. So the more we can do to help them just makes that end-to-end execution a lot smoother. And so, yeah, we've brought that in-house, and then we've also got our performance marketing team, which is generally done by an agency. So that's your team who are buying Facebook ads, Google ads, they're managing all your spend, targeting. Generally, that's outsourced to a marketing agency, but we've actually started building that in-house, which has been, again, really powerful, because you see something's not working, instead of waiting a week to change that over with an agency, you go sit next to that person for 5 minutes and say, hey, this isn't working, can we adjust this round? And straight away you've been able to move. So I think that's been a really powerful strategy for us.
Thank you, Brittany. Same question, Chris, for you as well. I mean, as a tech company, what are the plans for the future? And has COVID revealed any new opportunities for the business?
Yeah, well, we're in a unique situation where generally we aim to double our business every 5 years, and that's the sort of targets that we put on ourselves. But in FY21 we grew by 56%. So we more than doubled in a year. So we've got a unique opportunity now to keep growing, and we sell devices and the consumables that go on those devices. So now our opportunity is to get into the markets where those new devices are as a result of COVID, and educate the end user on more options, so more different patient groups to treat with that device and with that therapy, which is really unique for us, especially considering the amount of clinical information. So that's papers that have been published by doctors on non-COVID patients. So in the last couple of years, it's probably been one of the most rapid advancements in therapies that the products that we manufacture treat and allow to be treated has occurred. And that's great, because it allows us to sort of step out of the ICU and start looking at the respiratory wards, the emergency departments, the paediatric units, and more patients to treat with the devices that have already been invested in. So that's no mean feat. So we have to invest in more channels, in more people, in more marketing support, more educational stuff which they produce. And then also everyone in the background, from logistics to legal and finance, all of that has to be built up in the background to allow that to happen. And then we have to advance into markets which we previously weren't. So right now, for instance, there's a lot of demand coming out of markets which we might not have had a massive footprint in prior to COVID. So we've had to employ people to go in to those markets on behalf of Fisher & Paykel and educate them, and then allow them to educate the end user. So we have to give them the tools to be able to do that. And essentially that's our goal, is to increase the channels to market and increase the people that we have to keep growing, which is, it sounds easy, but with the size and the scale of what we've gone through, it's quite difficult, and everybody's having to muck in and put in a really heavy shift to allow that to happen.
Very interesting.
Chris, how do you, obviously you're operating in many hundreds of markets. Do you, in terms of the education of end consumers programs, do you customize them to different markets, or are they quite standardized?
We do. We've got a bit of both, actually. Mm-hmm. Obviously, different markets and different cultures require different things. And like on our website, it's a pretty generic site. However, with the advent of new therapies, we've released like an introduction to a clinician for a new therapy that may not have, say the sales rep can't get in there, or it could be geographically too difficult to get in there. We have those which can be tailored to the individual hospital level. So yes, is the answer to that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Very interesting, Chris. You're talking about you have increased the rate of production, especially in time of crisis, which is quite hard to manage the logistic distributions, manufacturing, marketing. So my question is, I would like to know more about, you're talking about internationalizing to different markets. And so, because since we're talking about AIB stuff, so the first question would be, how do you discover those markets, and what's the strategy? Are you going to do a joint venture, or just exporting your products there and just selling there, or how do you do that?
Yeah, so we have a number of channels, but generally speaking, we have a direct office, and they might sell directly to a hospital or via distributors within a market, or we have a whole country which is a distribution market, and they purchase off Fisher & Paykel New Zealand. We would ship to a distributor in market, and then they would do the marketing and sales post-importation. So I work with both, like a direct market in Brazil and a distribution market in Africa, Middle East, and it's varied. So we can't really tell who's, often during COVID, they have come to us, which is strange and out of the ordinary. We used to go and propose the idea of a new therapy, which a doctor might not have previously used, to them. So we would have been the one introducing the ideas. But given that it's exploded in its popularity and its effectiveness with COVID and with non-COVID patients, it's happening organically, and we're getting approached by countries that we've never been in. So we're having to find a channel in there, find a distributor, find a way of importing, understand the regulatory environment, tick all those boxes so we can actually get that product in there legally, and that there's going to be someone there to support it and be the importer of record and have a quality representative and install it and train the end user. So we're in a situation where we're having to really work on our feet, and like was mentioned before, one of the strengths which has allowed us to do that is having people in market which find those channels, which find the details which we cannot have the finite information from New Zealand. We need the existing channels that we've got to help us expand into more markets.
Quite interesting. My other questions more about the reputation of the company. Has COVID somehow impacted the reputation of the company? Brittany, I would like to start with you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that a big thing that we've faced is obviously our customers are facing cost increases from a perspective of freight, but we're also experiencing cost increases in terms of raw materials in China. So you're sort of being squeezed on both ends. So a lot of conversations are very tough at the moment, but at the same time, our operating structure means that we've been able to be a lot more accommodating than what our competitors are. So for example, if you look at our profitability, we have the largest incumbents within the toy industry like Mattel, who will make 4 times the revenue that we do, but we will make 6 times the profit that they do because of our operating structure and how fast we move. So it means that our reputation through COVID is that where companies haven't been able to absorb cost increases, be flexible in terms of working, we've been able to kind of absorb a lot more of that and still stay afloat. And we have done that. I mean, there's definitely been cases where we have increased our pricing, and that was a really tough decision. We actually did a blanket increase of 3% on our biggest brands, and it was a really tough decision for our CEO, because it was sort of like, is this going to ruin our reputation? Are people going to think that we're increasing? But comparison to everyone else in the industry, we were actually really low on that, and not only did that help us kind of increase our profitability, it just meant that we were able to do it in a win-win situation with our customers as well.
This question is for the last 2 speakers. To what extent it's because New Zealand has handled COVID so well, the reputation asset, the country of origin, like for the health sector, and you're producing PPE, has it sort of flowed through to, people see your products as very good, or have you benefited from the reputation of New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, we're mostly manufacturing within China, so especially with toys. We have a few lines of fast-moving consumer goods, so for example, collagen. I can't speak as much on that. I think Chris will probably give a bit more details with Fisher & Paykel as a supplier from New Zealand, but I think for sure the branding is the same as what it's been within that collagen product, as it's a New Zealand-made brand, which has still been powerful, but I couldn't say that it's increased through COVID.
Yeah, from our perspective, it's definitely beneficial, and that's pre-COVID as well. People view manufactured in New Zealand differently to elsewhere in the world when it comes to medical devices. There's a significant amount of regulatory and quality work that has to go into a medical device in order to meet all the standards, in order to be safe. And people trust New Zealand manufactured products at a very high level. And we've taken that very seriously as well. And we've implemented that in our day-to-day work practices. So we still wear masks at work. We still sit 2 meters apart. We don't want any risks coming into the manufacturing site which would affect the patient at the end of the day if we had to shut down. So we take things very seriously in regards to our products and the consumables and the devices that we manufacture that are there to treat the patient, and that is reflected in people's opinion of the product. And the last thing is we've shown up for everybody that wanted our product. A lot of device companies have had to, they might not have had the capacity, so they've had to choose who to supply to. And we've managed our customers very well in order to satisfy as many as we can with the products that they need. So that's it, and that requires quite a few tough conversations to actually find out what is truly needed, to avoid stockpiling, to make sure that global supply continues of our products for treating patients. So it's a complicated beast, but yeah, the New Zealand made thing is very well received.
It's not a question to any particular one of you. I guess any of you could answer if you like. I just thought with all the COVID-related issues such as distribution, supply chain issues, health and safety, and reliance on foreign cooperation, I was wondering if you guys believe the current economic model is sustainable. And when I say sustainable, I mean, do you see this way of trading and business lasting overlasting the COVID issue until it gets hit by something that actually relies on you guys changing the core functions of the economy instead of just mitigating the issues of, say, getting different workforces instead of actually having to revamp the whole economic system?
It's a big old question.
Yeah. Might be a bit too big.
The labour ones, really.
Yeah, I think we have to have a diversity of the labour force, and I think that it's a current and future reality. So whether that is going to be a tipping point for a massive economic change, I think one of the things that occurred to me when you were asking that question was the model that we have. So we have proprietary varieties, 2 wonderful apples, a little bit of a promo here, Jazz and Envy. You will find them in your local supermarkets, but we do export a lot of that. And so the sustainability of only being a New Zealand source proposition is long gone for us. And so for, a number of years, we license growers offshore in Northern Hemisphere and counter season to have a 365 proposition. So we can't rely on just a provenance play and just being from New Zealand Inc. So in terms of economic model, making sure that we're thinking, 365 days a year, all countries, how do we maximise that? So not only are we vertically integrated, with, from New Zealand out to the world, we kind of are getting as close to vertically integrated as we can be back, from other parts and using all those destination markets to really optimise the commercial benefits, yeah. And that feels to me like a way to ensure that you're not relying on one economic model. Not sure if that answers your question, but that was just a thought that occurred.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. Another big issue in international business is the role of government and regulation. I thought Niall might like to make some comment about, the changing roles and, the benefit and advantages or disadvantages that can bring. Yeah.
How long have we got? Yeah, it's kind of somewhat linked to that last question, which is a great question, by the way. So aviation is, we have to comply with rules, right? And the act, like an act of parliament, you can't just fly wherever you want to go and whoever you want to use. And I'll just give you a little bit of a backstory. If I was supposed to start up New York last year. That was the new port. And I did Seoul the year before. I think I'd done Taipei the year before that. So every year we add a new destination. So that takes a long period of time, right? You can't just imagine it. I'm going to go to Taiwan tomorrow. So normally, and this is normally, when I get involved, I would organise some auditors. I'll have to make sure that the people are, doing the maintenance of the aircraft, are qualified, trained, have recent experience. I have to make sure the base is ready to go. It's got the parts, materials. It's got the ground support equipment. All the things that people take for granted. Right? Now remember, when you get on a plane, you take for granted that you're going to take off and land, right? Everyone else worries about, what are we going to have to eat? Is it this food? Is it that food? I worry about your safety. So we would set that up in such a way that, we meet the not people safety, compliance, the regulatory requirements to land in, Timbuktu, say for instance. When I did my job, it would probably take 3 to 4 weeks for me to organise that bit. Someone in the back channels from dealing with the government would probably take an extra bit of time. And then I have my package and I hand it to the CAA and they would take up to 60 days, right, for a new destination. Last year, I was told we're going to Mumbai, and Delhi, and we're rescuing people. How long do you think it took that? It didn't take 3 weeks and another 60 days, right? We had to be really quick, really go for it, come up with different ways, different approaches to deal with this problem. We organised charter flights out of Wuhan, Frankfurt, Mumbai, Delhi, several other places. And we dealt with the government by saying, hey, this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to send Air New Zealand flight, engineers with the aircraft. And then we went, how's that going to work if we send a Kiwi overseas and the Kiwi gets sick? So you go, all right, now what do we do? So we had to use local people. So we had to go back to the government and say, we're going to use local people. Now that would normally take the same period of time, right? 3-4 weeks. We had it done in probably a week, 10 days. So I think dealing with the regulator, with the CAA and the FAA, EASA, for those of you who know your aviation, and CASA, our noisy neighbours, they've been really good in accepting what we are proposing, because we're giving them an alternative means of compliance. We're showing that it's still safe. We're using qualified people and our aircraft, and we're bringing people home. So they're in the same position. The regulator's in the exact same position as each and every one of us here that's in business. Whether you're in university, whether you're in the fruit business, it doesn't matter. The regulator's in the same predicament. They haven't got the revenue. They have to let people go. They can't get the pool of talent down that they want because the borders are locked. So just to finish, you asked me, is this sustainable? No, it's not. We can't keep going the way we are. Something has to change. Air New Zealand cannot go on the way they're going on. And somebody mentioned resilience earlier on. We don't want resilience. Resilience means to bounce back. We don't want to bounce back. We want to bounce forward, right? I don't want to go back to this. I want something different. So I don't know what the answer is, and I spoke to one of the lecturers earlier on, just a conversation, and maybe it's a simple thing like rapid testing might change the world, right? So you get tested straight away, and 2 minutes later you're good to go, you're COVID-free, and you land and you do it again. Maybe it's just something so simple, like a breathalyzer test or a pregnancy test or something like that. That can change the world. That's the technology that's going to change the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Or you walk under some infrared thing and it scans you and you know.
So I'm interested to know, because a couple of you have now mentioned bringing electronic marketing in-house and, controlling your manufacturing and so forth. And I just wonder how much has what's happened over the last year impacted your desire to have more or less control over business functions or business activities? So are there things that you've been tempted to bring in-house that previously were not, or are there things that you want to sort of shed?
I think for us that's a massive thing with vertical integration. Is it's also like relying on your core competencies, but that speed of being able to move, which seems to be a common theme. One of the big things with speed of innovation is we're always thinking, instead of thinking of your work week as 40 hours, think of it as 168. So how can you incorporate machinery in so that you're always on? And a big thing for us that we've got now is previously with our soft toys, like your plush manufacturing, when we wanted to get a sample done, you'd have to send it off to a factory, they'd send it back a couple weeks later. Now that we've got that in-house, it gets done in 4 hours. And the same with prototyping. Instead of having to send that to a shop and get it back a couple weeks later, you've got 3 people on the morning, the afternoon and the evening shift, and throughout that prototype being developed, they're able to edit it and, you know, improve it within the space of 48 hours versus 2 weeks. And so that speed is the key part of bringing things in-house. Where I'd say, I don't know if it's bringing it in-house, but what's actually been really big for us is we deal predominantly FOB in terms of shipping terms. So that means that when we ship something out, our customers take ownership of it at the port and then they ship it out. And that's actually been really key for us because I know that there's domestic models where, you know, Rachel will be familiar with that too, where you take ownership of the goods locally and then you have to ship it out. That's been something that we have kind of realized we don't want to take that over, because where we had tested it before is we now have a stockpile of inventory that we own in France, that France is in lockdown. Now we own, you know, $2 million worth of stock, and we don't want to own $2 million of stock that can't go anywhere. So in a way, that's been part of that value chain that's actually been really powerful, is still not having to own that stock gets taken by our customers.
That's an interesting point. You're saying that you're doing from ideation to prototype to putting out that it takes like 48 hours, right? My question is like, how do you make sure that the idea that you have, the prototype, the toy that you have is going to work out before asking any opinion, you know, your customer's opinion or getting any feedback?
That's a how much time have we got kind of question. Toys is a fascinating industry. So we're doing right now, we're working on all of our product plans for next Christmas. So all the buyers are about to see all of our toy plans for next Christmas. But we have so many items that we will prototype up that we will be about to ship, and then we'll be like, nah, can it? It's not right anymore, or something changes. Like we change that fast. So we will get so far down development, we'll show it to every buyer in the world from 151 countries. They'll all know about our sloth that we're going to sell, our moving sloth, and then all of a sudden COVID will hit, or there'll be a shift in the market, and we'll be like, actually this doesn't make sense anymore. So just having the ability to move fast, but sometimes we be like, no, it doesn't make sense anymore.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I kind of like forgot my question. Because I'm in the tourism industry, so I totally understand you. When everyone talk about adapting, reshaping, transition now, we are still around the survive status now, you know. My question is, for this crisis, what's the timeline you perceive is opportunity for you? You know that in this kind of industry, when everyone make masks and already have people already make a lot of money for the face mask, when you start to centralize and then already people making money for that, you are a little bit late for that. So what's the timeline you perceive is opportunity for you in your industry? You think when you reflect now, you think it's already too late for you, or if you can plan earlier, you can make double or triple money than now? It's clear. I
think that's the $1 million question, right? 2 years ago, we made $250 million profit. Last year, we lost $460 million. So if I could answer your question, I'd be a millionaire, I reckon. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, I've read several reports about how long this is going to last. The worst case scenario was 7 years, I've read. My gut instinct is we're probably, well, some of my colleagues are saying Christmas, things are going to change Christmas, January, because, you know, everyone will be vaccinated and bubbles will open. You know, but I don't necessarily agree with that. So my hometown, Ireland, there's a lot of people, I think it's 78% are vaccinated. It's huge. And yet this morning we had 2,000 COVID cases the day before. It's going back up again because, you know, the bars are opening up. And for anyone that's been to Ireland, when a bar opens up, you know, after being locked down for a while, it's party time. So just because you have the vaccination doesn't mean that you're not going to get COVID. So, you know, going back to what I said probably a couple of minutes ago, I think the key is the rapid testing. Getting that result really quick will be the key to us getting back to a new normal. You know, and maybe Air New Zealand will never be the same. Maybe we'll just be a local Oceania type of airline, you know? I don't know, I can't answer that question. But I think when you look at the amount of airlines that have gone bust, you know, LATAM in Chile, you've got, you know, German Airways, you've got Virgin let go 8,000 people, you know? You look at all these massive airlines, like Thai Airlines, they weren't allowed to go bankrupt. You know, the country, no, you're not allowed to go bankrupt. There's no money, but you're not allowed to go bankrupt. So I think, I don't know, maybe I'll pass it on to the panel here. What do you think?
My question is for them. What you perceive is opportunity for you guys?
I think for us, we didn't grow like maybe Fisher & Paykel Healthcare did. Did you say you doubled, or I can't remember? Yeah, but I think in terms of the answer to the how long is the window for capitalising on the opportunity for a business like ours is to take the need to be, I'm not going to say resilient, you might bash me, to bounce forward. Just kidding. The opportunity is to take the need to be, like, we've had to push ourselves to be more agile, more reactive. We've had to push ourselves to have diversity of channels, is to take that that energy and that momentum and make it a thing a way that we work now. That would be my answer to the question for the sector we're in. You guys might have a different one.
I have two more questions, and then we get back to you guys again. But I would like to ask this question. That's my favorite questions. I am teaching, you know, technology, innovation stuff, so I'm quite interested in this emerging technology. Chris, I would like to start with you, and you're talking about this massive expansion. You know, your Fisher & Paykel is, you know, undertaking and going to different markets, and, you know, I would like to know about the role of emerging technologies such as, you know, AI, such as machine learning, such as Internet of Things, before and after COVID.
Yeah, I can sort of touch on the previous question as well, and that Fisher & Paykel, we don't buy technology, we invent it. So we employ engineers for the past however many years to develop the product before we think doctors are going to need it, so new therapies, and then we'll go out and we'll do the hard work around teaching end users about these products and about the therapy. And prior to COVID, we'd been doing that for 10 years. So it wasn't just overnight success, it was 10 years plus of hard slog doing that work, thinking, yeah, we think this has got legs, we think this therapy is really going to be successful based on clinical results that we've seen in physics and biology, and putting that all together, coming up with something new. Being market leaders, being first to market has allowed us to do that. And I think that's an important philosophy which we'll continue to do, is to spend the money investing in those engineers sitting in New Zealand to come up with these ideas. And that will also lead into what we're going to do around education and making sure that we can develop the product, get it to the end user, and then make sure that they're educated. And having those online educational portals and being able to reach them in different ways is going to rapidly evolve. We're doing it at the moment in certain ways, but without doubt things will change, things will advance, and we've got to make sure that we keep on top of that, from not only from the back end, developing the products, but the front end as well, making sure that we're showing up to the end user and is adding value by teaching them about the product and about different ways of using those therapies.
Great. Getting back to the questions about in terms of technology and how the role of new emerging technologies, Brittany, what do you think? You talk about vertical integrations and resilience and supply chains and things like that. How these emerging technologies would fit in the company?
Yeah, I think for Zuru, the biggest area where tech comes in is in our manufacturing processes, because we're quite big. We actually don't adopt a lot of what the new tech is that's coming out, like blockchain, for example, because there's a lot of cases where if technology doesn't make sense for your business, it can often cost more to set it up and then maintain it than you'll ever get out of it. So where we see the most return on it would be manufacturing. And even then, some products, we still rely a lot on labor versus capital. So our bunch of balloons, the water balloons, I don't know if you guys know, they all fill up all together. That factory is fully automated. So that's been a really great way for us to be able to, again, always be on in terms of production and not rely on labor. Whereas on the other hand, where we've got dolls or plush, where we rely heavily on labor, we've had massive issues with capacity, because you've got, for example, as well, Vietnam is one of the biggest labor sources for that kind of manufacturing as well. And COVID's hit them massively. So all of that demand has now come into China, and we're now having to pay even higher premiums for factory capacity as well. So I'd say those areas where we've had factory automation, our blasters as well, the water guns and also the blaster guns, that's all automated too. We own those factories. So where we own the factory and it's automated, we've actually been able to really hold our ground strong through this. But we already had that set up before COVID, so it's been something that had been set up prior that's really helped us through.
Rachel, same questions for TNG Global. How did you apply it?
I would say we're early on in the digitisation technology. It's not hugely widely used in parts of the value chain in fresh produce, but for us, robotics in the picking and the post-harvest or packing, pack house space is something we're looking at. We have trialled some robotics out in the orchards, which is pretty funny to watch. But quite, there's more development that needs to be done, but we're definitely looking at those things. I think one of the really interesting spaces is, and we're starting to look at it, is adopting technology that preserves natural resources and minimises environmental impact. And I've got this phrase that I heard a wee while ago at a think tank type thing called the era of the public that we're now in, when we as organisations are not judged solely on our product or our people or our personality as leaders. We're actually judged on our global kind of citizenship. It's how we behave and how we conduct ourselves, not necessarily what our product is. And so for us, that's ethical sourcing. It's looking at being able to map orchards and look at chemical composition and drainage, and how are we then able to take that story through to our customers and our consumers so it becomes a competitive advantage. And then I guess that kind of leads me to the technology around blockchain, because for us, for the vertically integrated part of our business, and even the non-vertically integrated, where we need to kind of fake it to make it, I mean that in a very credible business way, how can you engage, how can you use that digital blockchain for the compliance, the regulatory, the efficiency, but then how do you use it to engage with consumers and customers on the story and the traceability and the provenance and the genetics? It's quite an exciting space for us that we're just starting to get our fingers into. I can grab that. Went flying past you.
Hi, good evening. It's really nice listening to each one of you. This question is probably anybody could answer. You are the receiving end from the government regarding protocols and regulations, but looking for the future from surviving to thriving, what is your pitch to the government? What is that paradigm shift that you're looking at for the future years to come, in the next couple of years at least? Have you had that opportunity? If so, what were those ideas that you had pitched to the government from surviving to thriving? Thank you.
We've done a lot of work with the government around labour. So, and again, pan industry or primary industries kind of banding together. And obviously we've had reasonable success in the last couple of weeks, but that's been a long, hard slog. So that is more of a survival tactic, but it's essential to recovery and thriving in the future. So that's probably one thing. We've also done quite a bit of work with communities around food networks, with some of the poverty that's been caused by COVID or the increase in poverty. What's our role in communities, local, regional, urban, rural? How can we work with other organisations to ensure that the food we do have in New Zealand stays or gets into those communities? So that's part of our pitch to government. But I think that COVID, again, that's been a really positive outcome, because we've kind of examined ourselves in that context and gone, what do we need to do for the communities in need? And that helps us with our global story, because it gives us credibility back here in New Zealand, which is an essential part of being a global brand, as I'm sure anyone in international business already knows.
So this one's for Zuru. So obviously there are some changes in your consumer that you can't really predict as rapidly. So we spoke briefly about the changes in your consumer and how the new COVID babies kind of have not COVID, well hopefully not, have anxiety and fidgeting things, and you're kind of catering to that market with your fidget toys and plushies and stuff. How are you able to forecast or predict these changes for after COVID, they might have the behavioural issues, well not issues, but the changes that they might have in your next end customer?
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question, because I guess at the moment we're reacting, but you're sort of asking how we proactively planning in that. And again, I think we are inherently quite reactive when it comes to development, because, for example, we may sell in, 1 million fidget cubes, and then all of a sudden no one wants to buy fidget cubes anymore, and then it's our problem and we have to pay someone for that. And so it's getting that balance right. But I think just in general, like I said, we're preparing for next Christmas in terms of our product pitching, and a lot of our products are around nurturing play patterns, kind of health, and also having that kind of cuddle factor as well, especially in plush. And so I think we get those insights a lot from the market, but also buyers. We're always watching patterns in terms of what's selling, what's not. But I think that's a really great question that I'm interested to find out, is to see for these kids who, in New Zealand it's different, we're so privileged, but when we're looking at global countries where kids haven't left, and you see those videos of COVID babies going shopping for the first time, and they're seeing other people, and they're it's not just me. So it's really, it's us just absorbing. Information moves so fast now, right? So we're able to get a lot of information. It's just making sure we're always looking for it and reacting to it. But already I think that nurturing's been a big thing, because kids can't play with each other. So how can we bring those kind of learnings into toys? But we don't really focus on it, but companies that do a lot in terms of STEM, they're doing a lot of investment in terms of those type of toys too, which has been a big pickup as well. But you see the shift in terms of subcategories. Doll play has been huge through COVID, so dolls has really taken an increase in sales because it's role play, it's aspirational. You're, even though you're not with people, you're kind of living that out through the doll play. So that's been a really big one as well. Yeah, that's a great idea. I'll pitch that one.
Yeah. Double jab dolls.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have recently came across some organizational studies about how companies around the world are utilizing emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence across different functional areas. I think probably most common area will be marketing or supply chain to cope with COVID-19. I'm hoping if any of our panelists could share some experience or stories about how your organization is utilizing this emerging technology to create new knowledge or information about your customers, predicting customer demand, and helping you internationalizing.
Not too much from our side, to be honest.
Yeah.
I know Air New Zealand, I don't know I can't probably answer it, but I know Air New Zealand, we're doing a lot of trying to find out, when we have unaccompanied minors, and they had like bands on them to know where they were going, like probably GPS set up, and I'm not too sure on what they were using with it, because obviously data with children is different. But from emerging technologies perspective, I know we've been using it in maintenance, but not to answer your question, no.
We have like a little bit, I don't know if you guys are familiar, Zuru's also got a housing project. So that's like our long-term one, and that's the most tech-rich area of the business. And that's where they've done a lot in terms of machinery and robotics, and being able to scale. And coming back to customization, so you're able to customize your product, but at scale without losing economies of scale. So traditionally you kind of go for a cookie-cutter model because you lose efficiencies as soon as you customize it. But they're really using AI in terms of manufacturing and being able to allow for customization, but without losing any of that economies of scale.
I'm just interested in, for a long time we've experienced a world before COVID where we had, increasing integration, and everything was moving that way. And then suddenly we had the double whammy of COVID and also kind of trade protectionism and these other things, and we had this interesting experience. It's very difficult. I know Zuru's, your primary market's America, and you've got, you manufacture in China, and you have to think about how do we navigate that. But we also hear these stories about governments being a bit more responsive, regulation being a bit easier, about working with people over Zoom in markets, maybe the Japanese market, very difficult for medical care, that's very difficult to get into, and people changing their practices. So I guess my question is, what's the kind of the trend between things the world becoming smaller and the world becoming a bit more protected again? Mm-hmm. Have fundamental working practices with the way people work together in rapid prototyping over Zoom and kind of over, remote working, is that a permanent impact that's increasing our integration long term? Or have there been kind of changes that are making it more difficult for us to be integrated?
I think it's both, to be honest with you, because, for example, as I mentioned earlier, I would normally go over to, say, Taiwan or Korea, and I do an on-site audit, right? And during that on-site audit, I do a lot of verification of what's happening, what they do, all the way through their systems, right? So now we've got some relief that we don't have to do that. So we do remote auditing, through somebody would carry an iPad and we direct them, but you don't know what you don't know. I can't tell that person to turn left and go have a look at the stores, because he probably doesn't want me to look at the bad bit of the stores. So, there's pros and cons to it. I think if we had someone on the ground that we knew that could do that auditing, would be fantastic, right? So I do think the world will change, the new normal. I don't think I'll be going over to Taiwan and spending 3 days there and 2 days travel, or sending 2 engineers over. I think we'll be using somebody to give us, proof via video link or something like that. Mm-hmm. Most definitely.
I agree with that. I think it's a bit of both. We've certainly experienced greater collaboration, perhaps on compliance and regulation, and I think that's because some of the more developing countries are very concerned about food shortage, food not getting in, scarcity and poverty, and so that's allowed us to work much more closely, and we hope that continues. I think that certain protocols that had a time frame, you have to have this done, or by this date, have been relaxed a bit, again because of COVID, because they're concerned about long-term food security and shortage. And we hope that continues, but it's hard. I think that's quite hard to predict. And I certainly agree. If I think about the way that we travelled to do business pre-COVID, I don't think we'll return to that ever, because you won't have enough aeroplanes for us. No, but I think we'll be, and not just a cost thing, a safety thing, an environmental impact. I think people will be a lot smarter about how we do that travel in the future. Yeah, which kind of means it's a small, like your question, it's a smaller world, but it's a bigger world, but it's a closed world. But it's interesting to see how it all pans out.
Thank you. And this is my last question, and then I get back to you guys, because I think maybe it's interesting to know also for smaller, because we are in New Zealand and 97% of our firms are small and medium-sized enterprises. So I would like to know, or if you want to give them any advice or any lessons that you learned during this COVID that might be useful for them, because obviously they don't have the capacity nor experience, you know, in terms of disruption or crisis. Chris, I would like to ask the questions to start from you. Do you have any advice or any lessons that you think might be useful for other businesses, especially smaller ones?
Yeah, well, I guess I can comment from a New Zealand perspective rather than looking at the markets offshore, because that's two very different strategies. But one thing that Fisher & Paykel has done very well is, firstly, we trust our people. So we invest in our people, and they, when you trust them, they tend to show up and put in a shift, which may not necessarily be on their job description. And everybody in every department in Fisher & Paykel has had to do that and put in a significant amount of work. And the reason why they've bought into doing that is that they understand our ethics, and also the communication level from our internal sort of crisis management team has been at a very, very high level. So they make it very clear, this is what the government has said, this is what we're going to do, and this is why. So everybody understands we're going to have to, you know, increase capacity or work like this or change the way we go and have lunch, whatever it might be. It's understood very quickly because it's explained, and that communication has allowed every employee within Fisher & Paykel New Zealand at least to understand why we do certain things. So that's definitely been a learning, and that something which the team here has from February, March last year adopted very, very quickly, and, you know, just stopping travel instantly, not allowing people to put themselves at risk, and adopting that effective communication, I'd say, is one of the standouts. Even, not that it was bad before, but it has just been excellent and excelled in the last year and a half.
What about you, Brittany?
Yeah, I'd say in Zuru it's a bit of a buzzword is pivot, and I think that's something that we always do, but within New Zealand and small businesses, I think it can sometimes be really hard to pivot because there's a lot more of an emotional connection as well with small businesses. You've got staff who are like family, but in those situations you can't really afford to not risk it. You've got to pivot, and you've got to sometimes make tough decisions, but it's also a time where things, depending on the industry, may be quieter than usual, maybe more crazy than usual, but in that quiet period, how do we refocus? How do we maybe, you know, make lemonade out of lemons where we've kind of had to slow down or we've lost a lot, but how do we make the foundation stronger and build them up again? And I know we don't want to talk about resiliency, but I think that resiliency with small businesses in New Zealand has been so powerful, with family-owned operated ones especially, is coming back to those foundations of what your business is, changing your focus and adjusting what you do where it makes sense, but kind of holding on and taking those wins as you can get them.
I think what Chris said, which I interpreted as people first. I think the crisis, if organisations weren't doing that, it's an absolute must-do, is you have to put your people first, and from that you get the most rational and emotional engagement and discretionary effort anyway, but that shouldn't necessarily be the reason you do it. We have to put people's health, safety, well-being first, and it does bear out commercially. I think over-communicate. You know, most of my team are running markets overseas, so the not seeing them in person is kind of exhausting. Chris and I were talking about this before, and Brittany as well, and you'll have this as well, Niall, but it's so where, you know, we would do a day's workshop in a market to crunch through a whole lot of stuff. We can't do that, and so with my team it's 60 to 90 minutes max, but we might do that every week as opposed to every fortnight or every month. So working out what the best way to get that, because pushing big change through is pretty difficult on Microsoft Teams constantly. So that would be the other thing that's really important, is just over communicate. And the last thing I would say is it's been a really good opportunity to kind of really simplify strategy and go, we need to do a few things well as opposed to try and do everything. And that, I think that's a learning we need to take forward use. It's a really simple thing, but it's hard to do.
Yes, we've got two questions from people coming in on Zoom, and they're both about location and supply chain. So our questioners would like to know, are you thinking of changing locations, manufacturing locations, or are you thinking of changing your supply chain? So having a more sort of global perspective. Commercially not sensitive, of course.
Okay, so it's quite difficult for Air New Zealand to do that because we're dependent on the OEMs, and the OEMs are based up in, Europe or America, from Boeing and Airbus point of view. However, just before COVID, we were looking at 3D modelling for making parts, actually in conjunction with AUT. So we were making aircraft parts, certain parts, small parts, not engines or anything, but parts that were like, you wouldn't believe the cost. The cost was like 10 grand for a tiny little turnbuckle or something that would look like a doorstop, right? We could make it for $150. So, but to get through the legislation and to get permission to do that is obviously you got to jump through hoops. So, once again, we were doing that pre-COVID, and then COVID came along, we had to stop. So I'm hoping we get back to that. We are also doing inspections using drones, would you believe? So we'd have a drone and we were going to test it and go around the aircraft, and a job that would take 2 hours would now take 15 minutes. So it was trialled up in Singapore, and it sounded fantastic, but then we realized it doesn't work on the black aircraft. Something, who would have thought, right? So who would have thought a colour would stop the inspection happened? So I hope I'm asking the question. It's very, very difficult for Air New Zealand to deal with that because we're so dependent on the outside world.
Probably one of the things that COVID's accelerated is our global supply chain strategy and looking at where we hold inventory. So looking at holding more inventory offshore, and obviously the shipping problems have really forced us to study that really closely. So that's probably, from a supply chain perspective, one of the changes we're looking at.
I think it's very industry specific because I'd say in our FMCG side of the business, that's the same, right? You want to own inventory because you want to have stock on the ground, like in the UK with our shampoo and conditioner. Great example of we don't want to ship it FOB like we do with toys, but toys, because it changes so much, your risk of inventory is a lot higher versus consumer goods. But I'd say, again, it depends on the industry. For our vitamins, for example, what often happens is we'll launch in New Zealand and Australia our new products. So we've done vitamins, and for example, that didn't work that well in Australia and New Zealand. We didn't actually expect it to do that well when we moved to the US. Walmart came in with a massive order. We've launched with them, and it's absolutely flying, but because of regulations and also because of the supply chain, that's actually manufactured within the US locally. So there's certain situations where, depending on regulations and depending on how that supply chain works and the product, it makes more sense to produce it locally.
I guess from our side, just to answer that question, we're kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum, and we're quite long-term focused. So as I mentioned earlier, we aim to double every 5 years. So fortunately, when COVID hit, we had the 50th warehouse or manufacturing site ready. So we're already in the processes of planning, where are we going to be in 5 years? So we manufacture both in New Zealand and Mexico at present, and we've got room to expand even more. So we're very much, we think we're going to be there. We're going on the right channel. It's just up to us to convert that based on what the engineers produce.
I've been most impressed by your stories and the challenges you face and overcome. COVID-19 has changed the world, but for each of your businesses, what's the biggest change that's been forced upon you by COVID-19?
I'd say labour for us, and as a primary industry, that's been the biggest one. And the most difficult, one, definitely labour.
I'd say ours would be the shipping crisis. I'm not sure which one you can which part of that you can pin it down to, but the shipping and supply chain bottlenecks and constraints, but also just the way of working, like the Zoom, the communication, that's completely changed for us is the way that we work.
Yeah, ours is just a complete change for our sales teams. I'm just going to focus on that for a minute. They're locked in their houses in some markets around the world, and they have been for a year in some circumstances. Previously, they were going into hospitals every day, talking to doctors, talking to RTs, talking to nurses about products and about therapies and educating them. Now they're not. So they're having to find another way to do that. And that's difficult on them, you know, physically and mentally. So as well as, you know, getting the job done with the increase in demand. So they've had to, it's like a double whammy for them. So we've had to support them with tools, and they've also gone above and beyond where, you know, it's just a very, very unique situation for them.
Yeah, I think as well as all the things mentioned here, I think the biggest change for us is going to be trying to retain people. We've lost a lot of people, and we've started to rehire. Some of those people don't want to come back. The younger people do not want to go into aviation because it's so fickle. You know, whereas it used to take the best of the best, now we can't get them. So it's not as an attractive space to work in, to operate in. So I think that, you know, some of the guys that I know, brilliant engineers, they don't, these people don't happen overnight, you know, it's 10, 20 years. Yeah, trying to get those people back or get people to stay that long is going to be very difficult.
Do we have any other question? We have time for one more question.
I got a question for Brittany and Rachel. I think both of you mentioned the shipping issues or problems, because recently I interviewed some Chinese logistic companies, and they are suffering from Suez Canal crisis, and the negative impact even still going on. And I wonder if your company is suffering from the shipment delay, and have you projecting any delay for Christmas sales? And if so, how does your company manage to resolve the problem? Yeah.
I think the canal, what was the name? The Green Suez Canal, but what was the name of the ship that got... Evergreen. Evergreen's made things ever black. No, but it caused a lot of congestion. So at Hong Kong and China as well, that's probably where we've had the most suffer, which has obviously caused container shortage coming back to New Zealand, but it's also caused shipping companies just dropping ports off. And then kind of telling you, sorry, we're not going to stop there anymore. So that has just been a daily grind for our shipping and logistics team. It's slightly better at the moment. For us, the bulk of our Apple shipping will be done in the next kind of 4 to 6 weeks, which is great. So we won't have a Christmas. I'm not sure if I caught Christmas in your question, but so it doesn't have a big impact for us out of New Zealand. But then our counter season is out of the US into those same destination growth markets for us in Asia, and so it will be interesting to see what the impact on the northern hemisphere shipping lanes and ways are.
We definitely have a big fear about missing Christmas, especially in toys. We're like, is Santa coming this year? Not sure. We'll find out. He's stuck in China. But it's like you said, it's a daily grind. Like, I wake up every morning and there's another fire to put out. Like, you're just always trying to problem solve and come up with solutions. Our economies of scale have been a huge help. So the fact that because we are within toys, because you can imagine within a store, sure, you've got toys, but you've also got consumer goods, you've also got tech, you've also got homewares. So all of these buyers are trying to get their goods into the store. So I think we're at a level now, because toys are so seasonal and reliant on Christmas, at a top level, at a DMM level, we are getting prioritization. But being one of the biggest suppliers means that we can get prioritized, whereas this is where smaller suppliers are really going to struggle. And we see it in New Zealand too. Like, so many industries are consolidating because those smaller suppliers are just really struggling to keep up. So that's been good to keep up with that. One thing we've looked at is, like, you know, changing ports. absorbing costs instead of trying to ship out of Yantian, which is, lower down towards Hong Kong, us then paying to truck it up to Shanghai and then shipping it out from there. We have a team of merchandisers who are like the space hunters, and they're just trying to find space with freight forwarders. A really interesting one is Eastern Europe. They're actually looking at trucking goods from China instead of shipping it into Eastern Europe. So there's been changes in terms of routes that have gone in place. I know that when you look really long term, they're also looking at the possibilities of going up through Russia, if global warming has that impact on melting ice away. There's all these like long-term plays into, but yeah, we're just fighting every day as hard as we can. But it's definitely a struggle, banging your head against the wall sometimes.
And it's expensive, right?
Yeah.
Like the retrucking, the repacking goods because they've gone to different places, and for, like in our business that impacts the growers, the people growing the fruit. So. It's a big deal.
There's a lot of empty shelves in the US at the moment. When you look at pictures of stores, there's a lot of empty shelves.
Wonderful. It's been a great panel. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. Obviously, this is kind of topic that we can talk for hours. I personally enjoy a lot. I'm pretty sure you guys also enjoy. So please join me to thank our great panelists.
So it falls to me to offer a vote of thanks. So this evening's initiative is a very new one for AIB Oceania towards our goal of building outreach and inclusivity and having impact and relevance, and you've certainly helped us a lot along the way. I'd like to formally thank AUT University and especially the Department of International Business Strategy and Entrepreneurship for their co-sponsorship. Can I please encourage you to think about joining the Academy of International Business? You can look at the resources on our website, which is www.oceania.aib.world. And we look forward to hearing from you and perhaps seeing you at more of our events. So it falls to me once again. Omid, thank you for your great questioning, and thank you very much indeed to our really excellent panel. Thank you again.